Hi, I'm Carrie of Clothing Creations by Carrie, and this is Behind the Thread. We're going to talk all about thread today. There's a lot to know about thread. We could probably do a whole semester course in college pertaining to thread, the science behind it, and all of the things that are involved when it comes to talking about thread. But we're going to keep it short and we're going to stick to the most important things. So, one of the questions I get asked most and conversations I've had over the years is, what brand do you use? There isn't one answer for that. There's lots of great brands out there. There's some brands that are more well known and easily accessible than others. So, my answer to that question is essentially if you find a thread that's in your local quilt shop, it's probably going to be of good quality and it's going to be a thread you want to use. So, the brand names, there's lots of them out there. What I gravitate towards is Gutermann and maybe Mettler. Mettler makes a great thread. There's lots of great threads out there. Those are threads over the years that have been easily accessible, that have met my needs. So I'm not saying the other ones aren't good and that you've made a bad decision if you've used other brands. Those are just a couple that come to mind that I gravitate to because of they're easy to get and they meet my need. So after you narrow down the brands that you have access to and what's easily accessible and what you want to choose from, the next thing you need to know is what type of thread do you want to use. So there's tons of types of threads out there for different purposes. The one that we're probably most familiar with, this happens to be Gutermann, but most brands make an all-purpose thread. It's usually going to be made out of polyester, so it's going to be a polyester thread, which is going to meet a lot of the needs for constructing clothing. Most people use it for quilting. All-purpose thread is it's a basic run-of-the-mill thread that you probably have mostly in your inventory. That's mostly what I have easily accessible in my sewing space. So all-purpose thread's kind of the go-to. If you have a good quality brand, then that all-purpose thread's probably going to meet most of your sewing needs. Along with that, this is an example of Gutermann, and it's a heavy-duty thread. So it's great for sewing really thick materials. It's good for sewing on heavy-duty buttons. And so it's just a little bit thicker than a normal thread, and it's going to be a little more sturdy, but it's going to be a little bulkier as you're working, as you can imagine, because it's thicker. The next type of thread I have here is what they refer to as a nylon or invisible. So if you don't want your stitches to be front and center, maybe you're trying to just tack something on, or you want something temporarily, this nylon thread, it's made out of nylon. It's very thin. It's like a filament, kind of like a really thin fishing wire. So it's a little tricky to work with because when you're trying to thread your needle and work with it, it's hard to see. So some people gravitate away from this, and some people have it as a regular item that they would use in their sewing room depending on the type of sewing that they do. There's a white variety. There's also a darker variety. So if you're hemming pants, it's good for blind hems. So if you're trying to hide that stitch and you don't want it to be seen and you have dark pants, you probably want to use that darker thread if you have it. A light one or white one like this is going to probably meet the needs, but if you're going to do a lot of it, you might want to invest in the darker color. Next thing I have on my table is serger thread. So if you're using your serger, you probably want to use serger thread. Yes, other threads will work in it. You can feed other threads through there. But if you're doing a lot of construction and you're using your serger a lot, this is the type of thread you want as a serger thread. So again, I gravitate towards Gutermann, and then I've acquired a lot from other people over the years that are different brands. Anything in your quilt shop is going to be a nice quality thread for you to use in your serger. So if you're in a pinch and you want a certain color, or you want to use a decorative thread, or you're doing other elements, you can certainly run other threads through your serger, but you probably want to try your best not to use like an all-purpose thread and use a serger thread when you can. And likewise, you don't really want to use serger thread in your sewing machine unless you need to. And if you do these things short term, once or twice, when a project here or there, your machine is not going to break on you. Your machine's going to be fine, but they're just designed a little bit differently to work for those certain purposes that they're made for. The next thing I have in front of me is a decorative thread. So decorative threads are a lot of fun. This one is an 8-weight. So when we talk about threads and the numbers, if you're familiar with how the gauge is on wires, the lower the number, the thicker the thread or wire, The higher the number, the thinner and smaller it is. So this is an 8-weight thread, and it's pretty thick. So you're going to be able to see it on the camera. It's got some thickness to it. This one also has some sparkle to it, so it's a lot of fun to work with as you're decorating projects. You're not going to get this through a needle in your sewing machine or your serger. So the best uses that I've seen is either hand sewing it with a needle that has a really big eye in it, or using it in loopers of your serger for different decorative elements. Next thing I have in line here is metallic thread. Metallic threads can be a lot of fun. They can do wonders with embellishments and just snazzying up a project where you want it, but they can be a little tricky. So the key with metallic thread, there's a few things. You want it to be a nice quality thread. You don't want to buy this out of the bargain bin. You put it in your machine, you're not going to have any fun, you're going to be frustrated, and that's not what we want to do when we're sitting in our sewing space creating our projects. So you want a good quality metallic thread from a well-known manufacturer. And then you also want to use a metallic needle. We're not going to talk about needles today, but that's one of the keys. The frustrations that people have is either the quality is low or they're not using the right needle, and the combination of both, you're asking for a disaster. So you just want to be mindful of what you're using and how you're setting up your machine for success. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is is just a plain cotton thread. So serger thread and regular, like an all-purpose thread, they do come in cotton. So if you're working on something and it's 100% cotton, you might want to consider matching that thread with that type of fabric for the best results. This here is a variegated thread. So variegated just means it's as you go along, the colors changes. So this one's a lot of fun. Comes in different colors. This one's green. We have pink, blue, purple, just about any color out there you can imagine. There's different combinations of what you can do to get the look that you want for your project. These are usually either rayon, viscose, or nylon, maybe not nylon, but viscose or rayon. And they act more like an embroidery thread, but you can use them in different sewing projects. Here I have 3 examples of embroidery thread. So embroidery thread is going to have a nice sheen to it typically, and it's typically going to be made out of rayon. And they come in different shapes and sizes with different manufacturers. So again, there's a lot of really great manufacturers out there. You just want to make sure that it's a quality thread that's going to stand up over time with your project. So this one just happens to be a Madeira thread and is on a smaller spool, which is great if you don't have a really big project, you need a specific color. This one happens to be Floriani, another great brand. Lots of thread on here. And then there's jumbo options for thread. So this is obviously a really big spool. This one's probably going to outlive me. I don't know. We're going to see if I can use it up. So there's lots of options, lots of varieties with how threads come. This one is quilting thread. So again, a lot of great manufacturers out there. If your quilt shop is carrying one of these threads, it's probably going to be great in your projects. So they're typically maybe a little on the slipperier side. There's some that probably have a little bit more grip and texture to them. This one's a little slippery. This one's a Wonderfill. And so there's lots of options out there. This is an option. This looks like it might be serger or it could be embroidery. So you really want to make sure you pay attention to your labels and see what you're getting so you get the right things. There's also bobbin thread. So if you do embroidery, and so for some quilters out there, especially embroidery, you want to use bobbin thread. It's a fine thread. And so it's not going to take up a lot of bulk as you're sewing it together. So some designs can be very dense when you're embroidering them. And so that helps tame that thickness. And then with quilting, the same thing. Sometimes people do really dense patterns and they might want to use a lighter weight thread on the back of their stitching. So I talked about thread weights. So the higher the number of the thread weight, the thinner or smaller the thread. So typically a bobbin weight thread is going to be a 60 or an 80, depending on what you're doing. And then a really big decorative thread is going to be an 8 weight. 12 weight's really good to work with too. Not only can you use them in the loopers of a serger, but you can actually use 12 weights in needles. If you probably want like a 90 size needle or something bigger, or a top stitch needle. So because it's thicker and it's a little bit harder to get through there. So you can typically do 12 weight thread in your needle, but you don't want to go any bigger than that or have a lower number than 12. So one thing with your machines and thread that I have found some people are not aware of is when you're removing thread from your machine, you want to pull it out in the direction that it would run in your machine. So if your spool is up here, you don't want to lift up your presser foot and pull it backwards. You could damage your machine. It's not good on it. The thread's not made to go backwards. So you want to pull it out through your needle as if it's going through the machine and come out that way. I like to keep in mind you want to use small scissors so you can get in the small spaces and just snip the ends of the threads when you're doing your project. So I have these scissors. I always have a pair like this that are handy next to my sewing machine. And then they also make little snips like this if you prefer something that's ergonomically different in this aspect. Well, that concludes this episode. I will continue. I have a few more things I want to say, but I wanted to keep this short. So watch for the next video and we'll wrap up the conversation. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you want to know. Give me some feedback. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff so that I can keep creating content that's useful for you. Thank you.